That's changing definitions of what luxury is. This is the real luxury.
I think so, and this is what you do when you have the opportunity to do these things.
I see.
We're not interested here in making money as much as we are feeding people and doing the right thing with the opportunity that we have.
Right.
We have the opportunity. I mean, I know that early on, you and I think, have talked about this, Obi. A casino sounds antithetical to social justice and environmental stewardship, but you can take a corporate kind of situation and implode it in a way that serves people.
Right. Well, it is an unexpected thing, perhaps even counterintuitive, isn't it?
It is, and it's antithetical, it's oxymoronic, whatever you want to call it. But as I like to say, imagine if Amazon did the same thing. We'd have peace on earth, Obi.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe, yes. I'm being a bit of a reductionist at this point, but
those eggs look amazing.
Yeah, they are.
So how many varieties of chickens do you have?
We have, I think, 5 varieties of chickens and laying all different colored eggs, these chocolate-covered eggs. People have never seen a chocolate-covered egg. These are French chickens. They're called French copper Morans, and they lay a chocolate-covered egg, which the French chefs prefer. We have blue azures, which lay everything from moss green eggs to sky blue eggs. And then we have, your basic Rhode Island Reds and some of your other kinds of breeds here that are your brown egg layers.
How did you get so into chickens? Are you into chickens?
When I was a very lonely little boy, I was an odd child and didn't mix as well with humans as I did with the farm animals that I was around. So the chickens and the goats and the horses and the cows were all like my friends. And Obi, to this day, I can go back to the old dairy farmer's wife who's left alive, or the old manager on a horse farm, and I can do the genealogies of the animals, their fathers and grandfathers and all of that, just as I can do the genealogies of my people in the tribe. I think I developed these kinds of talents from my love with the animals. So I can... there's goat farms. There's Redwood Hill Goat Farm here that has descendants of goats that I owned 55 years ago. And I can trace them all the way back to a goat named Imagining Water.
That is wonderful to hear you talk about there, Greg. We've got a very different type of character to our episode 3 of Place and Purpose here.
It's the farm.
Hearing you talk in this voice, with this language, as opposed to the wilder language of the mountain, which is behind us for a few miles. And why I'm so drawn to this is this inherently resilient idea of inviting nature, if you will. And I think I'd like to talk to you at some point about concepts of what nature is, between capital N nature, like the thing that surrounds us, that we cannot escape ever. That's always unfolding, related to this process of rewilding, and little N nature, which is really what I think that most sort of American culture sort of thinks is what nature is, the thing out there. Right?
Yeah.
Nature is the thing you go to visit.
Yeah.
But here we're inviting nature, big N, in, as the farm manager was explaining to me, that the produce here is better than organic.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Because of the there has never been poison in the ground here.
No.
It's always been dependent upon diversity, right? So I think that's a fascinating perspective, really. In the future.
Obi, I love what you're saying, because first of all, a basic principle is that, everybody would say to me, "Oh, you're Indian, you must be into nature." As I've said before, if you're breathing, you're into nature. Okay. And so nature isn't something separate. This, an organic farm, or whatever endeavor we do, organic or inorganic, is all of us interacting as part of nature. not separate from it as we'd like to think when we throw chemicals on the land and don't think anything's going to come back. But whatever we're doing, we're interacting as part of nature, and the consequences will always be something in nature and us, and come back to us. So we do know that we have to eat. We do know that with the way the cultures and societies are today, we need food. And so what are you going to do that's sustainable and is a healthy working relationship with nature? This isn't necessarily new. Remember, California indigenous peoples, right where we're sitting, always cultivated the bay trees, the acorn trees, the oak trees. We raked under them, we pruned them. The sedge that grows along the lagoon, the women for their baskets would thin that sedge out so you'd get longer roots. So we were always, in a way, farming and working. You know, there's that stereotypical notion of, you know, we were something walked around naked with beads just picking berries all day. No, no, no. We were very actively engaged in shaping nature just as it shaped us. So as we needed longer roots, easier to make better baskets and so forth, we cultivated the sedge along the creeks, which also kept the creeks cleaner from debris. The same thing as we get more acorns. We talked about controlled burning. You burn under the acorn trees, kill the moths and the worms, you're going to get a better crop. The grass grows better for all the elk and deer and the pronghorn that were here. So again, all of this, all of what the Europeans first saw was a result of a relationship between human beings and their environment.
Yeah.
The human beings were always in some way shaping their environment, just as a group of acorn woodpeckers do, taking acorns from the trees. Everybody, all of us, I say every one of us, animals, birds, you, me, we're constantly shaping nature. The question is, how do we do it wisely?
How do we do it wisely, and to what end?
And to what end?
So as we've come to understand over the past several years, and in the growth of Western technology and the advent of agriculture in general, that it was and is a very costly extracting process to go about agriculture, as it is practiced to increase the human population to what it is today, right? 8 billion people. Right?
Yes.
400,000 people are born a day
only
on this
billion
planet. Right?
200 years ago.
That's right. 400,000 people are born a day.
Yeah.
Like, since the Queen died, 8 million people have been born. Right.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
I'll be quoting that.
Yeah. You know, like it's as opposed to what I believe was happening inside of pre-contact California. That was and what is revealed to be a very conscious eschewing of that extractive mindset, right? So, like, the idea of the feeding the nutritive adaptive cycle of the landscape as opposed to taking from it was something that was known. I think there's a common misconception. Wouldn't you agree that in historical thought, in Western thought, the idea is like the Indian never fully realized agriculture?
Well, that was the thing. You know, I remember talking to as a young man, talking to a wealthy white businessman, and he said, well, you know, what difference does it make if we took the land? The Indians weren't really using it. The Indians weren't using it. Think about that. And they justified that. But
yes.
Again, what you have, there's a conflict of belief systems. And I think the indigenous people understood inherently that for every action you took in this world, there would be a counteraction. You're not in here alone. So, you know, You kill a bird, you disrupt its family, and then that will maybe keep the birds afraid of you. You know, the animals were quite friendly before the Europeans came. You could walk through a herd of deer or quail, and the quail would be like chickens all around you.
Oh, you were telling me a marvelous story once. I'd like you to tell me again now about the relationship of the grizzly bear with the gun.
Yes. So, well, and the grizzly bear and all the pronghorn and elk and deer, you could walk through a field and just practically touch them or do whatever you wanted. But it was the muskets, the shot, the loud noise of the bang of the musket. The animals learned very on to associate that with death. And so they would run. They learned to be afraid of human beings because they see us now. And you have to understand this, and I believe it, as Mabel would say, whether you believe it or not or true, that the animals, they've learned to see us as guns, not as other people or other brothers and sisters, but as guns, people that killed them. So there's this huge fear of us. They stay away. They watch from a distance where they didn't before. And to go back to that story, yeah, the grizzly bear, we had agreements with them.
We had agreements with them. It was a fundamentally different understanding of relationship. There's like the noise of the gun. I almost think it's like
of those loud
like a piece of
too.
Epigenetic information, like a piece of trauma.
And we have proven we've talked about the crows. Remember, they figure out certain masks associated with death. All of the animals did that. So the bears would have certain places they would live, and we had agreements. And then there was that liminal place where bears and humans came together in the human bear cult, where people would call it what you will, but the old, particularly the Pomo women and Coast Miwok women, were the most powerful cult. We had many secret cults. Was the grizzly bear cult, and they would don these in caves, these bear capes, and travel 200 miles a night and travel around with the grizzly bears. So there was this, no matter how you want to.
What does that word mean, cult? Like
a cult. Oh yeah, the cult is. I know that's got a negative.
That word.
That's got a negative. In many ways, it's got a negative connotation, or we'll just say selective or secret societies, if you will.
So, like, there was like this body of knowledge that was kept. Was it gender based?
Much of the cults, much of the secret societies were gender based, Obi, and in this case, the women, and that's why there was no such thing as rape here, because also you didn't know for sure which women or who might be a grizzly bear, but might be a human bear. So you respected at all times, and it was shall we say. The wonderful thing about this, it was international. It was between nations. So there might be leaders of certain women, human bear societies that would walk to village and while they were trading with other nations, see a young woman they would like to get into the society. And so they would take that person, train her. And the most important thing is that these bears ran with the bears and were communicating.
So between tribal sovereignties, you're saying, like,
between tribal sovereignties, there was and that was another thing that kept peace, because you had these relationships between nations that weren't predicated on nation state, but on society and relationship with nature. So, but there was that relationship between, even if you want to just see it as metaphor or a story, where people were interacting as human and as bear with the bear population and vice versa.
I think this stuff is incredibly relevant, Greg. As I understand it now, what we've got here is like this need for a certain type of consilience, a certain type of unity of knowledge between these two worlds that I like to skirt in my own work, between the scientific innovation, the idea that echoes Mabel's thought of, whether you believe it or not, it's true, right?
Yeah.
But also there's this traditional ecological knowledge that isn't at the table yet. And by the table I mean state policy,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'm really thinking about that. Like, how do we really bring in that traditional ecological knowledge? Like, what did I think it's Wilma Mankell? I think she said, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and like I feel like we're at this cultural moment, you know, which is why I feel like our conversation here can begin to like I feel that pot begin to really boil as it simmers. That this turning point in California culture where we're realizing that we have all of this knowledge sitting here that you are representing and projecting to me here now, that is so relevant to the idea of relating, and this is a tough one, non-human communities, where we begin to like dislodge, as I think that we touched on this in episode 2, we dislodge this anthropocentrism in order to build this more resilient society, where we begin to, as we talked about last time, net neutrality by 2045, as we begin to conceive of a post-carbon economy. We can't do that the way we're doing things now. We have to listen to these old stories, it seems to me.
We do, and I think that, you know, we talk about traditional ecological knowledge, or tech as we call it, and it's really important and wonderful to know how to do controlled burning and things like that, but I think more so, or along with it, and along with the science, there has to be a kind of reckoning of thought, how we think about the world. Because if we continue to see the world as separate from ourselves and don't understand the consequences of what we do, because controlled burning is a conscious decision on the part of humans to do something with the landscape.
Right.
So until we have to begin, I think what's so important is begin seeing the world in, I don't know if it's not an indigenous way. We don't know. We can't go back. As I like to say, people, I'm not that old. I wasn't there. But I think begin imagining that certain concepts, just think about them, meditate on the fact that, you know, from the old ancient stories, all the animals were people once, and they're people now. Just start thinking of that. We talked about chickens and cows early on, and I used to dream as a kid, and I still have these dreams sometime. I did a couple days ago, of an animal's, a dog or talking to a coyote, and then it becomes a human.
Yeah.
And so the old people said, well, see, you're dreaming ancient. And you're also dreaming.
You just had this dream?
Yeah, you're dreaming eternity. That's the eternity. And I can remember as a young man, sounds silly. I've never told anybody this, Ovi, because I think it was always kind of silly. But I remember when I was working on a dairy farm as a kid, 10, 11 years old, and the cows are all herded in. These are corporate. This was a little before corporate, but they weren't ecologically sound. And there'd be 150 cows, and they're all herded in for milking, and they're all standing on concrete and standing in manure and so forth. And I remember having dreams that they were all women that I knew, or women in church waiting to be milked.
Huh.
And think about that.
The nutritive.
Yeah. But even so,
Sources.
As slaves, they had no choice. They were taken away from their children.
Exploited.
They were exploited. The only way we get a cow's milk is we have to take the calf away from her.
Well, you know, I mean, that's
So, I mean-
something you and I have in common. You know, I was sort of raised by women too.
Yeah.
You know, I
Yeah.
had a lot of very powerful women
Yeah.
in my life. I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah.
To have not, certain aspects of my mother's family and my mother's tradition, she being a clinical psychologist for so many decades,
Yeah.
right? So, like, really wondering about the nature of the dream,
Yeah.
right? As you were just explaining, I think like the coyote turning into a person is so interesting. I just had this, you know, I think most of our dreams, as much as I can reconcile, most of our dreams are probably just sort of some sort of neurophysiological residue, right? The firing of whatever cerebral processes as our body
Or emotions
rests
we're
back.
wrestling with at the time, or whatever.
Exactly. But then there's some where you enter this almost like this poetic space where forms can be associated that you wouldn't normally do in waking space. I had this dream last week, and this is a dream that I've had a number of times before. And I'm usually like in a boat on some sort of body of water. And underneath the water, the whales are all crowded, and they're huge, like the biggest beings that have ever been on planet Earth, and they're just piled on top of each other, and everything under the water are these big vertebral mammals, and my boat can't even move because there's so many whales, and I don't know what that is. I mean, I think somebody like Jung might say like the water represents the subconscious, and this is like the vast wealth of life under there.
Well, think about this, Obi. What Mabel would say, I don't know nothing from no symbols. So she would say, well, start talking to those whales.
Since we've started this endeavor here, Greg, and this might be a segue into talking more of the seasonality that I know you and I are both thinking about. I've been really wrestling with Mabel's forthrightness, the lack, the absence of what she says very plainly, that imagination doesn't exist, and that's that idea too of nature, capital N.
Yeah, nature, exactly.
You're not something different. You're not something different.
It's not a symbol of something. It is something.
Mm-hmm. She almost removes, and this is funny too, because this gets into something almost like a correction I want to say from last week, or last month rather, when you were telling me about the fog song.
Yeah,
and our viewers could go back and listen to that again. But I said at one point rather flippantly that there might be some like quantum entanglement, which is actually like a real word in quantum physics and a real concept. And I don't think that's what's happening there. And I didn't mean to imply that that would be a gross mistranslation. And I am very, Greg, if I have like one mission in my path here, it's to keep concepts separate that need to be that need to be separate, and to join them only when the intellectual synthesis is really ripe and ready to do so. I don't mean to like cross contaminate science with the humanities or with cultural truths, for example, just because I have some other agenda of bringing all of human knowledge into one sphere. I don't think that's something that I can do. When she says that she doesn't know what symbols are, when she doesn't know what imagination is, I wrestling with that is a daily become a daily practice.
Let me see if one of the ways that I can explain it. I'm not there. I'm with you more. I mean, I grew up a rational, science kind of based, privilege of science person, as we all did. We went to school in this country, but for Mabel, maybe one way to think about this is there's not the binary that there is in the Western world between the physical and the otherworldly, or the story, or the metaphor, or all of that. There's not a separation. They're not different. They're one and the same. The Western world thought is that there's a binary. There's science, and then there's religion, and all of that. For Mabel, that binary doesn't exist. It's one holistic view that incorporates all of those things. Sure, there's science. She knows what to do about the acorns, about doing controlled burning, or what to do with the sedge along the creek. That's science. Let's say that's science. But she also has dreams about where to go get it and what to sing for it, right? She knows what how to please the tree besides just burning out from underneath it. She knows how to thank it. She knows how to speak to it. And it appears in her dreams, just like the old timers would dream when the salmon. So you think there was no
binary space between like the waking and the sleeping dream? Like, you've used that word before, as like an active it's like an active verb that she was engaged in. The dreaming. This is my dream. Now. That word means something very different. Than the thing that happens when we're asleep, almost.
Well, and again, I didn't want to say that topical features of a language predicate how a mind works, Obi, but the Pomo language is an action-oriented language. So English is subject-oriented.
I see.
So I say, I go to see the chickens.
Yeah.
Whereas a Pomo would say, going to see the chickens.
Yeah.
So they're stressing action versus subject. Now that doesn't mean that's the way the mind works, but you made me think of that. And
that's a very what we're engaged in now is the analysis of a dialectic, even like semiotics between us. What are the symbols that we use to describe reality? I mean, that's what we're getting at here. And I think that fundamental shift in viewing nature big and nature little n starts with, let's get our terms right.
Yeah.
Now, of course, definitions in general are about, definare means quite literally to build a fence around in Latin, right? It is a rational imposition upon power of language. And I find more and more that this is a worthwhile endeavor, especially when you're trying to do art and science at the same time, to really okay, so what does actually meaning mean? What is actually life? What is actually life? These kind of thoughts take up a lot of my space, and because of it, I'm going backpacking this weekend. Thank goodness. I'm going up to the big trees, Sequoia in the Sierra. I'm giving a
So glad they're still there.
They're still there. They're going to, I'm so glad. I'm grateful that they're still there too. Okay, we can leave it at that. The discussion of their future is a whole panel discussion I'd love to have with you someday. But I'm giving a talk this weekend at the California Naturalist Conference. And I'm very much looking forward to addressing that group, discussing these ideas of consilience and the unity of thought. I'm going to do some backpacking before then, because since I've seen you last, Greg, I've turned in my next book. I got
Lucky, I know. I'm jealous. I've got 3 more chapters at least on mine.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Can you tell us what your next book is?
Well, yeah, it's actually a follow-up from it has everything to do in a way with what we're talking about. The Crow sisters are up there telling creation stories, but now what they're doing is telling for the forgetter stories. So it's all the people once they've left the mountain and they forget all the lessons from the mountain, and they're repeating them and what they have to learn over.
Oh, so this is more of a sequel to How the Mountain Was Made.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, not Becoming Story.
No, not
your
Becoming
most recent
Story.
book.
Yeah,
okay.
no.
So it's less. It's
call
less
it fiction.
It's less memoir. It's
less memoir. Yeah.
Becoming Story was really first person.
Yes. Yeah.
You call it fiction. Is that what you just said?
Yeah. Well, remember, anytime you write a memoir, it's never the life that was lived. It's the life that you're choosing to remember or can remember at the moment. But the other thing I wanted to say, what we were talking about how do we negotiate, and it's so important, Obi, because that's what we're trying to do right now. We're negotiating different worldviews, and how do we do that? How do we open ourselves and you don't want to give up who you are. That's a lie, or how you think. You want to do something new that ensures survival. And so one of the things that Mabel always used to say to me, I used to ask her, well, what does a story mean? And again, that goes back to the way you and I were trained. It must represent something.
Right.
And all she said was, life will teach you about the story the way the story teaches you about life.
It's a living relationship.
It's a dialectic.
It's good. There isn't an object.
It's ongoing.
that's put on a shelf. Well, I mean, it can be that. It's the literary tradition.
And the stories
very
change
much in that too, but
and have different meanings. I mean, Romeo and Juliet means a lot different to me now than it did when I was 16, and Lear means a lot different to me now than when I was 16.
Oh, it's true.
So you see, they're always the story doesn't seem to change, but it does, because a story has no life until you're reading it or hearing it.
You could say that about
The way you
art in
continue
general.
life. Stories are living things. It's the things we have as human beings. We can't fly, we can't do anything, but we can talk, we can tell stories.
I love that because you can really see it from like 10,000 feet. That can be art, that can be science. You know, it has no meaning without the audience, without the conversation, without the culture that it exists in, and the humans who are relating with that culture.
Right there, you can experience just in language the essence of life.
Yeah.
The essence of life. We are here engaged in it, and if I have a million stories and you don't hear them, I may be alive, but the stories that I have are stuck or will die with me unless I pass them on and give them life. It's seeds. The stories are seeds.
Hey, speaking of seeds, now I'd like to throw a wrench in this because you know, I mean, as we want to like veer the conversation towards seasonality, you know, like what have we noticed since our last episode, and what are we expecting to see over the next month? I think that's a nice sort of way to frame these episodes here, as we've talked about. We have this thing happening right now where we're moving from summer to winter. There's this whole season in between there.
Yeah.
and when we last spoke, it was 100 degrees outside, and now the temperature is you know, it's quite warm here in the valley. We haven't seen much rain, but there's a lot happening seasonally. And I wonder, how about this for like even the metaphor of like, as we're changing our stories in order to ensure survival, we're doing it on a scalable level inside time that is local. We're not talking about like saving the world. We're not talking about new visions of reality. We're talking about getting from summer to winter. It's just concentrating on what is happening in the land right now. Is, I think, a way of connecting to, almost like connecting to this time shed. You got food sheds, you got water sheds. You almost have this time shed that where agency can really be effectual, right?
Well, the seeds, the harvest time, the seeds right now are the world's stories that will carry us on to the next season. They each have their own story that ensures our life. All right. So I always think of it in that way.
The seeds have the story. I mean, that sounds like something Richard Dawkins would say. Like that. I mean, that's beautiful. That's like the genetic story.
It is that, but it is. That's where science and this wonderful world of life are one, because it's just rethinking this. I mean, we save seeds, but the reason we save seeds is so that they will grow their story next year, so that our story, our life, our species can continue.
Right.
And so, and again, the other thing is, with this season, I mean, a month from now, Obi, we're sitting here, these trees probably won't have their leaves. They're all going to be gone. So it's all going to change. The nights will start getting colder. We haven't had quite cold nights yet. And as you mentioned, it's warm. But even the wind blowing from certain directions suggests a new season. And you can see the behavior of the animals. The deer in the mountains, and here I presume in the valley, there's more deer in the mountains, are rutting. So you see that. The woodpecker, they're busy planting their seeds for next season. The acorns are harvesting seeds. The turkeys are eating seeds and spreading them. The bears are eating them and leaving the seeds all over. So everybody right now is engaged with this seed spreading, seed continuing, right? That's what's happening right now. And it's fall. The light starts to change. The light becomes more muted. And all we're reminded of is if we haven't got to work, we must get to work, because we know that we're going to need to eat in the winter, and we're going to need to know that there has to be seed or story, if you will, for the spring.
Oh, it's beautiful. Yeah, harvest is a time of work. Yeah, for sure. And there's another kind of seed, of course, in the animal world. We've got in family Cervidae, we've got our black-tailed deer, we've got our mule deer, we've got our elks, all breeding right now. Now is the time of the antler, right?
It's very strong, the answers. Yeah. You know, the deer are amazing. I just saw one. I was sitting on the road as I was driving on the side of the road. by my mailbox up in the mountain, and it just jumped up. And this time of year, their necks are really thick, their chests are big, they're bright-eyed, they're husky, and those antlers are just powerful. And I watched them through the seasons up there, because after, when they shed the antlers, and for a couple months, except for being a little larger in size, they're indistinguishable from the does. They shrink down.
There's a whole idea that's actually part of the evolutionary strategy. So, like, the predators can't tell the males from the females in the springtime after the elk shed their antlers. Yeah, that they're hidden.
Yeah,
because they are weak.
Yeah,
this is now the time of strength, because you have to compete,
right,
in the eyes of the female.
It's also, though, interestingly enough, even though while it's the time when they're the strongest, like, you see these deer up there, I've seen them lock horns where I'm stuck on the road and they're stuck together fighting. It's also the time when the elk and deer are simultaneously the most vulnerable, because they've lost their minds. They're hormonally driven. They're 16-year-old boys going crazy. And they'll walk into cars. They'll fight each other on the road. And if you were a mountain lion or a bear, that's the easiest time to pick off a big male. Because they're not paying attention. They're focused on one thing.
Potentially. Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. The antler is such an interesting thing, though, isn't it? It's like, as I understand it, the light coming from the optic nerve in the eye of the deer towards the pituitary gland on a yearly basis dictates the growth of this bone.
Yes.
And deer are the only animal that does this, that make antler.
But
the whole deer family, Cervidae.
But it's hormonal.
It's hormonal. Yeah.
And all animals.
It's not like a horn. A horn is different. That's like it's surrounded by keratin. It's a bone core, but it's surrounded by fingernail.
It's a tooth that falls off or something.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
It's something like a nail, but it falls off. But it's interesting how much the sun and light affects hormones. Horses come into heat only when there's enough light. So they go out of heat now.
Yeah.
For instance, they will not come back in heat. Their 11th month gestation. So they will start coming in heat in end of February or March, so that they can have babies, however they evolved, in spring. Deer, light starts changing them, stirring up hormones about July, June or July, and they start changing and get ready to breed in, depending on the light and how the seasons are going, in August, September, October. Their gestation period is 6 months, so that they can have babies then in the spring.
I see.
And so there's this relationship, this co-evolution that was predicated on light and availability of food. It's beautiful. It works so well. But most animals, except for domestic cattle, chickens and everything, and now we use artificial lights and that, but goats, deer, horses, chickens, birds, everything, hormones are motivated, if you will, by light and the season of light. So for some, as the light becomes duller, they become more hormonal.
That's right.
Others become less hormonal.
Right.
Depending on their gestation periods and all of that. It would be horrible if a horse had a 6-month gestation period and had to have a baby in the middle of dead winter.
Yeah.
Right? Same with the deer. The milk flow is best in spring.
What you're describing there is a truth that strikes me is astrophysical in nature, in that all organisms in the northern hemisphere have a common relationship to the angle of the sun.
Absolutely.
And that is a really interesting unifier biologically. We could take this down to exactly the way the continents are put together.
Yeah.
And climate distribution patterns, for example, and how it's always changing, how it's always evolving, and it's always doing so together, which I think is a very important point, especially when you're talking about Darwinian science,
Yeah.
say, when you talk about somebody like Lynn Margulis, who in the 60s was really the first one to come up with this idea of symbiosis. We're all evolving together. There's a reason why baby deer are born in the spring. That's when the most nutritious green
For the
annuals are
mother's
coming
milk.
out.
She's
That's
going to
right.
produce the most milk.
Right, and that, yeah,
She
for the
dries
mother
up
and for
when
the
it
baby.
gets when there's less grass and the baby's grown by then.
Right. This has to do with trophic ecology,
Yes.
right? That
Yeah.
the whole system there. Margulis was in it with Lovelock for the Gaia theory, which is a difficult concept for biologists to take because it so easily gets diluted by mystical talk. I think
That scares scientists.
that scares scientists.
Yeah.
Well, I think it scares Mabel too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't find one, and this is what's so refreshing about the philosophy of Mabel McKay,
Yeah.
quite frankly, if you want to say such a thing,
Yeah.
is that she does not suffer the vocabulary of idiots,
No.
No. And I think that's especially, dumb philosophers. And sometimes I'm, get scared that I'm one of those dumb philosophers. I might be, but I appreciate the
All of
Socratic
us.
dialogue that
All
we're
of
here.
us, Obi.
Yeah, that's
I
true.
mean, no. I mean, a dialogue in its best instance, and I feel that with you and me, enlightens.
Oh, I hope so. I
So,
always come away from here
Yeah.
with the feeling of aggregation.
I'm reminded of all the things I should be thinking about more, and that's really important. I think if people listening can take away anything from our conversation, it's to be reminded of things they've already known and maybe think in new ways, or continue the dialogue. I mean, of these important concepts, because going forward, it isn't just going to be so-called traditional ecological knowledge. It's going to be a new mindset. It's going to be a profound individual as well as collective understanding of the interconnectivity of light and life and everything. And that really, think about it, Obi. The sun is the one thing, and climate disaster is the one thing. And what we've been doing to this planet is the one thing that will solve all social ills. It does not discriminate.
It'll solve them all, one way or another.
One way or another.
But
think about it. I tell people the sun and the weather, the climate, it hits you no matter what color, religion, whatever.
Well, you're going to the heart of the problem, and the heart of the problem is not. I mean, as we're understanding, it's more and more complex. The physicist Lawrence Krauss says, "I do physics because it's simple," as opposed to biology, which is very, very complex.
That is the largest wild dove I've ever seen. Have you ever seen a wild dove that big? Look at that dove. Did you see the ring on the back of her neck? She came to visit, but
That was
anyway,
a
go
fat
ahead.
morning dove.
She wanted to hear.
For sure.
Wasn't she a big one?
A big one.
Or
Big
he-
one. As I was standing around here this afternoon, I noticed the warblers were all around too. They're a migrating species, huh?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, I've got.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead. I couldn't.
I
I saw her
was
just
talking about
dancing around up there, and I go, "Does Obi know a bird's dancing over his shoulder?" She likes what he's saying.
I love it. Thank you. Well, yeah, the complexity of biological science is incredible.
Yeah.
As we, and to somebody just casually thinking about it, especially if you listen to too much of the news, the overriding weight of the bad news fails to account for, I think, what is happening here in our conversation, when I think that we're searching for what Wendell called solving for pattern. Inviting
Wendell-Berry.
Wendell-Berry, inviting in the diversity.
Yeah.
Into the agricultural technique, in the diversity of story, diversity of culture, diversity, racial diversity, economic diversity. Well, as we attend to diversity and justice, we're realizing that you solve for one thing and you solve for all things. I think that's what he meant by solving for pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And it might be that we're getting there somehow. I mean, as we talk about place and purpose, here we are in episode 3. We are also discussing where we see hope on the land. And hope is a thing that I'm not really sure it needs to exist in really resilient cultures that have accounted and have included this nature concept, big N. We are ready for whatever happens. Hope is something that, systems without agency, systems without power need to have hope. You follow me there?
Yeah.
It's a concept that I'm still working out, but I think that like I'm always looking for it because it's something people respond to, something I respond to, especially actionable hope. Like this week we passed the San Francisco, the state of California passed the what was the exact name of it was the Safe Roads and Wildlife Protection Act.
Also passed a bill to teach American Indian, California Indian history and culture in the schools.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
So, well, that's fantastic. Teach like it's a bill to fund.
It's encouraging. I would like it
We're gonna
to be
need
a mandate, but it was encouraging, and the governor signed that. And Senator Ramos from Southern California was the sponsor, and the tribe strongly supported that. But
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Well, I love talking because I think that especially now we're talking in October here.
Yeah.
This is election season. Politics are on everybody's mind. We can talk about a few things that have happened. I'm very excited the state of California passed the Safe Roads and Wildlife Protection Act. Yeah. That's going to mean that now whenever you want to build a road anywhere in California, you must, in the design specs, include wildlife corridor mitigation. And this is part of like the Wallace-Annenberg wildlife crossing down across 101. It's like roadkill is such a waste, and this is what I'm talking about. Hope written in culture, things changing now.
Let me just say something quickly about hope. Hope is a wonderful thing. I don't want to hope too much because I'm afraid of getting disappointed. It's why I don't gamble. I'm a sore loser. So I think what I always say, and I've said this before here in our conversations, I think gratitude. If I can be thankful, that's good. And Obi, I'm really with you because I become a victim. I become a news junkie and watch the news, but it depresses me often and creates enormous anxiety, as apparently it's doing for a lot of people. But what I say to myself, my mantra, my prayer, is the more problems, the greater the problems, the greater the opportunity to do something good. And I just stick to that. Try to bolster myself up with that. And I think that's one way to think about it. And as I've said before, if the sun comes up, it's another day, another opportunity that you have presently with all of nature to make decisions to, as much as possible, find peace in yourself as you're working towards peace in the world. And
that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Working towards peace.
And peace is health, basically.
And peace is health, physical, mental, cultural. As we talk about news junkieism and what is being reported, I would love to have seen some of these headlines on the news somehow about what is going on in Sacramento. The Fish and Wildlife Department this week announced for the first time the opening of 5 new positions towards beaver restoration, a beaver restoration project statewide. All beaver restoration projects up until now have been run by organizations like the Nature Conservancy and that kind of thing. And I know there's some tribal effort there too. Beaver are very important.
Oh, for water, ecologically, they're
Absolutely.
very important.
So,
And there was
we got California now involved.
Until recently, there's something that's all good news. Until recently, there was even debate around here whether or not they were native to here. And remember, they only disappeared 100 years ago,
Right.
80 years ago,
Right.
and then I remember 10 years ago people debating whether they were even indigenous here.
Yeah. Amazing. The memory.
Yeah, just gone. From one generation to the next, what is forgotten becomes normal in the next generation. It's bizarre. So it was normal not to have beavers when a generation ago it was normal to have them. And so much so it creates an ignorance.
I mean, can you imagine? At the beginning of the 20th century, there were 14 coastal Miwok, all women.
Yeah.
Can you imagine 200 years from now if the genocide had come to completion and the discussion was, were there Indians? Right? Were there beaver? Like 2009, we saw 20 coho salmon in the Russian River.
Yeah.
Like, were there salmon in the Russian River? Can you imagine?
And it was so thick at Jenner, at the head there, there's stories of people walking across the backs of them as they were migrating. They were so thick, just solid black as they were going up the river.
You said earlier in our discussion today, you said you were making a joke, like, I don't know, I wasn't there. Stories, though, don't they allow us to energetically keep these balls in the air, right?
Stories of what Obi keep me alive and keep me imagining, because if it was, it can be. If it was, it can be. Mm-hmm. So, everybody say, well, there won't be that much salmon. Well, there are things we can all do. There's things, of course, we can do. But the stories, and one of the things I was blessed with, and of course didn't understand it at the time, was being around a lot of the older people, a lot of the older Indian people, and hearing their stories of, I used to, be around a lot of the women, and they would be telling these stories, but gossiping about who was a human bear, or who did what, or this, or all this sort of thing, and this one did this, and this one had a song for this, and all of that. So you're privy to this world that was people and place like nothing else. And it was just, it was when you're young, what you're hearing when you're young, you certainly remember far more than what you remember when you're older. So I'm so glad that I can remember those stories, better than, what I said in a phone call with the governor the other day or whatever. But that I'm blessed because those stories are a link and a way to begin thinking about things. And I once said to Mabel after she had a stroke and was quite compromised, and I realized a lot of what she'd done to me, for me. Of course, here goes my ego, Obi. And I go to Mabel, why me? Why did you pick me? Or why me? Thank you. Or I was thanking her profusely, of course, but why me? And she just kind of looked at me and said, because you kept coming back.
There it is. There it is.
There it is. So with life,
you're like a salmon.
Yeah. Because and that is in fact pretty profound, but I was thinking, oh, you're intelligent, or you're this or that. And I remember when somebody said, oh, aren't you proud of Greg? He's getting a PhD. And she goes, oh, he's okay. She wasn't impressed with that at all, And so
that's good. That's good.
So, the only reason I've got what I got is because I kept going back. And I remember a medical student at Stanford asked her how she became a doctor. And she said, like you, a long time studying.
Yeah. That's right. Did you spend much time on the river when you were young?
Yeah, we did, especially in the summers. Obi, it's heartbreaking. I hear the water now is polluted. It's in bad shape. But I'm old enough to remember being in a rubber tube, a tire tube, and going from above Healdsburg virtually all the way almost to the coast, down like to Guerneville and through there. I can remember riding a tube all summer long and being barefoot and riding tubes with kids, seeing the fish that were in the river, the great fish. I'm old enough to remember in Santa Rosa, where 4th Street and Farmers Lane come together, right there, Highway 12 where it starts, and 4th Street, there's a bridge, Santa Rosa Creek, right below there. Now it's all made concrete, but right below there would be huge steelhead and salmon in that creek in a pool right below there. And we would go there and you could fish, you could almost dive in there and grab them out with your hands.
Mm-hmm.
And it was beautiful. And I had the magic of seeing these, they look black, of course, into the water, but these huge, monstrous creatures just swimming in that water, in that clear water in that pool. And it's not there anymore.
Well, the river can heal. Mm-hmm. We just saw another thing this week. You heard it here first on Place and Purpose News. Mill Creek down San Vicente Redwoods, down in Santa Cruz County. The Mill Creek Dam was taken out a year ago. Mm-hmm. And this week we found 15 coho and 12 steelhead. After 100 years, they came back. In the first year, that's what we found just this week. I mean, hope written on the land, right? And we've got coho, we've got steelhead, we've got chinook, the 3 indigenous fish in Russian River. Historically huge populations, like you were saying. We've got a fishery up by Sonoma Dam that releases 10,000 chinook smolts every. Is it chinook smolts? Let me see here. 10,000 steelhead smolts.
Yeah.
From Warm Spring Fishery were released. That's in Healdsburg.
That's in Healdsburg.
Yeah. Right. There's no hatchery production of chinook. Chinook populations are now at about 1,000 fish per year. A 20-year though average of 3,000 fish. NOAA wants to get National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, I guess, is the federal agency that monitors coastal habitat for indigenous fish, which is what we're talking about. They want to see those numbers up to about 10,000 to really get like a working population. We're going to have to take a lot more concrete out, like you were saying before, lamenting about that. But rivers can heal. Last year we had this thing that happened too at the end of September. Remember, we got that atmospheric river that dumped 7 inches in 24 hours, across the region, and that really cleaned a lot of these waterways. And so we were like, that dump happened right after the Mill Creek Dam was removed. So it cleaned out the watercourse and enabled the fish to have an easier time getting back. Is the rationale there, right? We don't have that now. We don't have the precipitation like we did last fall. So we'll see. I am hoping that we see some big atmospheric rivers in the next month before you and I meet for episode 4.
Yeah, because it came in October, I think, last year.
It was the end of September, beginning of October. We had a couple of big
about this time.
Yeah. I remember by Halloween there was already snowpack happening in the Sierra Nevada, which is unusual. Usually it doesn't really snow until after Halloween. So we'll see. We'll see in this era of one of the symptoms of climate breakdown is season creep. As summer extends longer into fall, or you see the opposite. You see winter creeping into October,
or
September.
Things are spotty. You get
things are spotty.
You get a day of winter in the fall, or a week of winter in the fall, but atmospheric rivers,
right,
and all of that. I just wanted to say something though about the fish, and the coho salmon and the low numbers. Obi, I believe they're out there. We have to do whatever we can as a species that we are to invite them back. Mm-hmm. And if we invite them back, that is getting rid of the concrete, getting rid of the dams, it's we sent them away.
Yes.
We chased them away. We said
consciously,
we said you're not important to us. We don't need you.
The erecting of this dam is the end of the salmon run on this river.
You're not as important to us as owning this water. And so, they knew, and they're out there. The real question that we have to do, and why we must work and take every opportunity we can, politically and otherwise, is we just hope that those few that are out there will last long enough so that we can remake a home for them.
Right.
And by inviting them back, saying, we're sorry about, it's like the Indians, it's like my ancestors. We have to do what we can to say, okay, this is what happened. We understand it's wrong. This is what we're doing to rectify it. Please come back.
Please come back. This is exactly this redefining, this resetting of what the goalpost is for this mindset of abundance. What is abundance? It's not me having rings and cars and jewelry and more. It's this, and quite frankly, it's an indigenous critique.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like actually a resilient culture, a resilient worldview begins with diversity, biodiversity, habitat diversity. We're seeing, when you say goodbye to salmon, you're saying goodbye to forests, because you're saying goodbye to those nutrients that come from the ocean in the form of the anadromous fish body back to the headwaters.
Well, they're brothers and sisters. They're in relationship.
Yes.
You know, we don't
Yes.
get it. You mess with somebody's sister, i.e., the coho salmon, and the redwoods are gonna say, okay, we're gonna turn on you too.
People are getting together though. I'm meeting with I'm giving a talk at the Anderson Valley Land Trust this month at their annual gathering too, with Brock Dolman from the Ecology Center in Occidental, and he's just such a hero for beaver restoration.
Yeah.
Beaver work with the salmon.
He used to come and talk to my class, and in fact, you remind me, he's the one that was so upset because he was telling me that people were debating whether or not the beaver had been indigenous here. And
They were everywhere.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
We've talked about those numbers in previous episodes.
Boy, you know what? They're wonderful in helping you fish.
Right. They're unruly, which is tough because they're gonna make dams where you don't want dams.
Yeah.
You know, and it's especially if you're a landowner and a farmer in some sort of
it's
traditional
something
sense.
we're all going to have to negotiate, because it's the same thing. You put these bridges across these corridors, and what you're going to do, and we mentioned this, I believe, in the first episode.
Right.
You're going to have more cougars in people's backyards.
So you're saying we're going to protect the predators?
Yes.
Yes, we're going to protect the
So
predators. That's
you know,
true.
it's the same thing with the beavers. You're saying we don't have much water, and you're going to let these things come and dam up and take what water I can get down should be getting. So it's going to be the same kind of struggle. But again, we must keep thinking in terms of dialogue and cooperation, which means on the part of all of us, some form more or less of sacrifice. We have to give. Indian people really understood the concept of sacrifice. You have to give up something. You have to give up some of your ideas, and we have to compromise.
That's interesting. I think there's a story to be told, though, of the value of ecological services. It's more like a savings account than a sacrifice, because beaver do specific things, salmon do specific things, predators do specific things that help and strengthen
You and I
human
understand
communities.
that, Obi, but the farmer does not. You're being idealistic. You're being an
Well, I'm
environmentalist.
trying to reframe it and not call it a sacrifice.
Well,
I'm
I think
calling
we
it something-
need to call it. I will take your issue, because I think we have. See, the problem with the Westerners, we're entitled. We don't want to hurt. We don't want to give up something we have or
I
own.
see. I think that's smart. Okay.
So we don't want to give up something. We don't want to hurt. I don't want to have to sacrifice my car. I don't want to have to sacrifice using electricity or this much water every day. But we have to begin to, in order to compromise, we have to give up something important. What you just said is, yes, we understand the importance of the beaver, just like we understand the importance of having elk back in Tamales Bay, down there at Point Reyes. But we also have to understand that, you know, and people want to get rid of all the dairies and take down all the fences. Well, do you want the elk then? Do you want to reroute Highway 1? Because they're going to have roadkill all over the place. So where do we come together Somebody has to sacrifice something so that all of us can live. God knows the beaver have been sacrificed. The coho salmon have been sacrificed. So we have to come back and understand that I think there has to be some yield, and Obi, it's going to hurt. I'm not always going to get everything I want. Even if I believe, and I do believe I'm correct. I got that much hubris that I believe that it's important that the beavers come back. But you and I are not farmers, and they're here. So do we have a battle with guns over this ideology, or do we come together in some ways to have a dialogue with the farmers? It's been hard. I've been a fighter, an environmental fighter and stuff for so long, but I've also come to understand that if there's too much fighting, Obi, all there is contention, and if not war, the feeling of war.
Well, you have two options: either communication through talking, dialogue, or violence. I mean, that's what you have.
Violence is what happens when what the Creator has given us as humans gives out, and that is language. When we can no longer articulate or talk to one another, people in a marriage, people in a relationship, people with one another, when they can't resolve things with their imaginations or yield or compromise or sacrifice or whatever you want to call it, then we have war, we suffer.
I think that's wise. Now, I would like to just, and this is almost as we're beginning to close up shop here. The awesome opportunity that we have, even to have this conversation, the miracle that it is that beaver actually still exists, that coho salmon still exists, that rivers, that we're understanding the processes by which the river can heal, that we might be able to even see that heading, right? That heading through this bottleneck that we're inside of right now to what can be, right? Discussing what was, is, and what can be is such a miracle. How do we steward that miracle?
Well, I think one of the things to steward it is to keep talking, because language has power and gives life. And so it is our song. Our conversations, I think, in their best sense, are like the old Indian songs. They're calling the animals and the spirits and the trees and the acorns back. They're calling it back. They're calling it to produce for us. That we're saying to creation, Obi, that we haven't forgotten.
We haven't forgotten.
And there's a few coho out there that we have to say, we haven't forgotten. We're doing what we can. Hold on. I'm out here. I'm going to do the best I can. Please stay. Don't, it's like, remember.
That got me, man. Sorry.
In a lot of the California Indian tribes, remember, there were one or two people left. Mabel was the last person speaking her language. As I say to my students, as I imagine being the last person speaking English. And you don't want there to be one fish out there that's the last one speaking coho. You want to make sure that coho continue. And so I want to say, hold on, find a friend somewhere, do something where you can, and I'm going to do what I can. I'm here. Listen, hear me.
That's wonderful, Greg. I can't think of any better way to conclude. I would just like to say maybe to our listeners, please follow us on the Instagram, Place and Purpose. He's the real Greg Sarris, right? Was it real Greg Sarris? Is that what you are? The real Greg Sarris? Or real Greg Sarris? Is there a "the" in the front of there?
Talking about language problems. Yes, the real.
The real Greg Sarris. I'm Coyote Thunder on Instagram. Follow us at Place and Purpose, and you can see episode 4, first Thursday in November.
Yes.
When we'll all be voting no on Prop 27.
No on 27, yes on 26.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you, everyone. Right, thank you, Obi. Great day. And thank you for sacrificing and coming here to the farm where we had to readjust the schedule. Thank you, all of you. And Jared, our director, producer of greatness.
He really is. See you next time.